the WildResearch bird banding station at Iona. We're now both on the executive board of WildResearch, so we've been working closely together. Even though she's living in Nova Scotia, she's still volunteering all the time. And I was very privileged to meet Colin through her a little while after that. So just a bit more about them. Kiirsti did her undergrad here at BCIT in ecological restoration, and then she worked a few years on different research projects in Alberta, BC, and even Jamaica. And then she did her master's through the University of Windsor, which she just finished. And I might add, she finished it with no edits. Who does that? I don't know. Kiirsti. And her master's was on how birds respond to forest restoration and fragmentation in tropical dry forests of Costa Rica. And she is now starting her PhD this fall on monitoring wetlands and waterfowl in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. For Colin, he did his undergrad at Mount Allison in Sackville, New Brunswick. And then he did his master's at the University of Lethbridge, looking at phylogeography of purple finch. And now he's working as a fisheries biologist for the Mi'kmaq Conservation Group there in Nova Scotia. So tonight they're going to be going over birdsong IDs by exploring the songs as well as mnemonics, which will help to solidify them to your memory. And they're also going to be showing spectrograms as well, which really helps with the visual aspect of the songs. So this workshop, as Laura mentioned, was presented by WildResearch earlier this summer in July. And I'm sure you're going to find it really informative and entertaining. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Kiirsti.
Okay, thank you, Angela. I'm just going to share my screen.
And I'll put myself on mute.
Yep, it's sharing too. And I'm just going to tuck that up in the corner. Oh, that's interesting. I can just see Angela still, not us, but I will just go like that. There we go. Okay. So thank you, Angela, for that wonderful introduction. As she mentioned, we gave this workshop for WildResearch, and the audience was more of a beginner birder or people who were new to birding by ear. So we understand a lot of you are probably more experienced birders, so this might be a little elementary at times for you. But we hope that you'll still get something out of it and that you'll still enjoy it. Yeah, we were very excited when Nature Vancouver reached out to us to get us to redo this. So we're happy to share a little bit about what we've learned about IDing birds by sound. Oh, there we go. Before we get started, if you have a scrap of paper and a pen or a pencil, that might be handy. We've got a few bird ID quizzes throughout. One even involves a little bit of sketching. So don't worry, we're not going to ask you to show us your answers. This is more just for your benefit. So you can choose to participate or not, up to you. The other thing is we're going to be playing bird sounds, of course, throughout. We'll try to warn you before we do. Some of the sounds are a little bit louder than others. So if you turn your sound all the way up, maybe turn it down after, but I'll try to warn you before we play them. And then finally, a word of warning. Once you start birding by ear, you can't turn that off. It's kind of changes your life. You'll find yourself watching TV or watching a movie and you're trying to ID the birds in the background and you're totally missing the plot of what's going on. So just warning you, birding by ear can change your life. Okay, so to start off, I just wanted to talk really briefly about some of the ways that Colin and I have benefited from birds in our education, volunteering, employment, and research. So as Angela mentioned, I just finished my master's degree and I was looking at birds, specific species of birds, but also entire communities of birds in Costa Rica. And so those two photos of me there are of me in Costa Rica using different recording equipment to record bird sounds. So yeah, so being able to listen to birds has really helped me in my education and research pursuits. Another example, through volunteering with WildResearch, I was involved with the nightjar survey as a volunteer. So that was another way that I was listening to birds. And then finally, employment. Both Colin and I have done quite a bit of birding by ear through point count surveys across Canada, but also doing like a virtual point count where we would be sent recordings and we would have to do kind of like a point count survey from home. So yeah, being able to bird by ear has really given us a lot of opportunities in all of these ways. So.
And one final way birding can improve your life is we actually recently got engaged, and we met while we were doing bird surveys in Northern Alberta. So if you didn't know birding by ear could improve your love life, well, there you go. That's one more reason to listen to birds.
Yeah, so that one's a bonus, I guess. Okay, but why listen from a birder perspective? One reason is that it can help you find more birds. So often before we see a bird, we'll hear it. And so if you can, if you know what you're listening for, or if you can sort of narrow in on that sound, it can help you find birds. The other thing is, I'm sure everyone's familiar with this situation where there's dense vegetation and you know there's a bird in there, but it's hard to see it. So being able to ID it by sound can help. While this slide is up, I challenge you to try and ID this bird, and I'll give you a hint. This was taken out east here, so I'll tell you at the end of the slide. Also cryptic birds, so not just birds that are in dense vegetation like this, but birds that we just don't normally see. Like rails and bitterns. If we can ID them by sound, that's really helpful. And then also nocturnal species like owls, nightjars. But also, for example, if you're doing a Christmas bird count, that's a day of very short daylight. So being able to bird by ear can expand the window of time that you're out birding for something like a Christmas bird count, because you can go out before dawn or after sunset. Also visually similar species, so it's a little bit hard to see, but this is one of our Epidonax flycatchers. They are notoriously difficult to ID by sight, but as many of you probably know, if they sing, it's quite easy to tell them apart. And then finally, and this is probably my favorite reason for listening to birds, it kind of opens up a whole new level of birding. I find it to be a really fun challenge, and it's the reason that Colin always has cold ears in the winter, because he refuses to cover his ears because he wants to be able to hear all the birds. And if anyone is wondering what this bird is, it is a magnolia warbler.
All right, so now that Kiirsti's described the possible benefits that you might receive from listening to birds or birding by ear, how do you actually go about describing the bird sounds? And the reason why it's important to know how to describe bird sounds is it really facilitates communication with other birders. If you are hearing a bird sing or a bird call and you're able to describe it to another birder, even if you don't know what that species is, if you can describe it in terminology that they're familiar with, then they will then be able to tell you what it is, or you'll be able to narrow it down further. So there are 5 main ways to describe bird sounds, and 4 of them we'll go through here. We have the pace, so how quickly the bird is singing, whether it's a very fast trill, for example, or a much slower regular song. And not only is it fast or is it slow, but also does it change pace throughout its song. So it could start quite slow and it can finish fast. And an excellent example of that is the golden-crowned kinglet. It kind of has this slow build up and then it has this little trill, descending trill at the end. So pace can be a really, really helpful way to describe bird sounds. And the same with volume, not just how loud or how quiet maybe it's, singing its heart out at the top of a tree, or maybe it's doing just a little whisper call. Those are important things to note. And like pace, does it change volume throughout its song? You could have a bird such as an ovenbird that starts relatively quiet, and by the end of it, it's almost deafening if you're standing too close. So these are important things to note. Along with that, you have pitch. So how high-pitched a bird is singing or how low pitch. This can really help identify a bird species. And just like the other two, are you getting it all on the same pitch? Is the song or call all on the same pitch? Or do you get that lovely variation in pitch? And that's really what makes listening to birds entertaining, is when you get these beautiful songs that are, a thrush, for example, that is all over the place in terms of its pitch. It's very pleasurable to listen to. And finally, we have rhythm. So even if the volume and the pitch aren't changing much, you can still have songs or non-vocal sounds that a bird is producing. So a non-vocal sound can be something like a ruffed grouse. When a ruffed grouse is beating its wings, you can also have woodpeckers that drum. Noting the rhythm of those sounds can also help narrow it down. And we have a really good example of that coming up in the woodpecker section. So you can have that to look forward to. And I mentioned there were 5. So the final way to describe bird sounds is through the quality of the sound. Now this can be a little tricky. As you can see, this is just a small example of words that birders can use to describe bird sounds. So there's a bunch of them out there. There are tons more of them. And in addition to these descriptors that are commonly used in field guides and the like, birders are also pretty notorious for coming up with their own words to describe bird sounds that make sense to them. And don't be afraid if it helps you remember a bird sound that you're hearing, by all means. But it is also important to learn these kind of standard descriptors. And again, that goes down to when you're communicating with other birders. If you're talking the same language, it's going to make it that much easier. And especially with a lot of these descriptors that you see here, if you go into any kind of bird book, you're guaranteed to see these words printed out at least 10, 15, up to hundreds of times. So it can be a little overwhelming. There are a lot of words spread out on this page, but instead of trying to remember 20 to 50 different descriptors, try grouping them into words that describe the same kind of quality. Do you have a dry or a liquidy song or call? And these words contrast with one another, so they're that much easier to remember. And we're going to give you a quick example of this group here. So we have burry, clear, and buzzy. And so these are, we're going to play a couple bird songs.
This one starts off quiet because there's a bird in the background, and then it's going to come in loud. So just be aware. Don't immediately turn it up. This is probably the louder one.
So this is a white-throated sparrow, and this is a great example of a clear whistle. So that is a very clear example of a clear bird song. And you can contrast that with a clay-colored sparrow.
Actually, maybe you need to turn it up a little bit.
Oh. And if the noise is very quiet or anything, feel free to turn off mute and let us know.
I'll just turn it up a tiny bit. Yeah, actually, that's probably good.
So
I'll just play this clay-colored sparrow again.
So as you can see, that doesn't hardly even sounds like a bird call or a bird song. It sounds almost like an insect. So it's incredibly buzzy. And again, these are ways to, instead of trying to remember 50 descriptors, you can group bird songs or bird calls that are quite similar. So those are ways to describe bird songs or bird calls that you're hearing. How do you go about listening? How do you learn to listen to birds? This is incredibly cliche, but practice, practice, practice. It's absolutely true. The more time you spend out listening to birds, the more familiar you're going to get with a larger variety of bird songs and bird calls. And when you're out there practicing listening to birds, really be mindful when you're doing it. Focus on, you know, one bird at a time, focus on one sound at a time, and don't just listen to it and be like, okay, you know what, I think I understand that. Spend some time with that bird. Watch the bird making its call, making its song. Watch how it behaves. Is it up and down in the column of the tree, or does it stay in one place for a while? All of these things to look for when you're watching a bird that aren't necessarily directly related to its song will just help you form a stronger image. Instead of forming a memory of a bird's song, all of a sudden you're watching a bird creating a visual image, a visual memory of a bird as it's singing the song. So you can combine the auditory and the visual, and then if you watch for the behavior as well, all of these things just form more synapses in your brain, and you can form a much stronger memory. And that in turn makes it easier to remember all these different bird songs.
If I can just cut in, actually, some people will even go online and look up videos of a bird singing because it helps them remember the song if they see the bird singing it. So might help for you if you want.
Start with the common species, and you can do this for a variety of reasons. Once you know a common species, you're going to hear them more often, so you'll get that practice much more quickly than if you're focusing on all the rare ones. And where it really comes in handy is if you know the common species really well, you'll be able to pick out things that are a little bit different. So perhaps my favorite complex of bird species is the American robin. There are lots of birds that, you know, they're robin-esque. They sound roughly like a robin, but they're a little different. So if you know the robin really well, start with the most common one, and you go out birding, you're hearing a robin here, a robin there, and then there's something that it's like a robin, but maybe it's a little burrier. So that immediately to you, because you know the robins really well, it stands out. So you'll spend some time looking for that bird, and chances are you'll see that you're looking at a tanager instead of a robin. So that's one reason to focus on learning the common species really well, and be aware of location. This can mean a variety of things. Obviously, knowing that you're in the lower mainland and what birds you might expect there is very helpful, but also be aware of when you're transitioning from one habitat to another. Let's say if you're in wetlands and you're doing some birding, you're seeing some blackbirds, etc., and then you transition into some old growth forest, well, all of a sudden, you're going to be listening for an entirely new suite of birds. So that'll help you narrow down what you're looking for. And in addition to habitat, on a much finer scale, you can also listen to where the bird is singing from. So is it singing from down in the bushes, or is it way up at the tip top of the tree singing its little heart out? That will really, again, help you narrow down what it is that you're looking for. If you're doing all this and you still can't figure it out and it's still singing, you can record tricky birds and ID it at home. A lot of people these days will have cell phones, and most of those will have voice recorders on them. So you can just whip out your cell phone, open the voice recorder app, record it, and then you can bring it home. This not only enables you to hear it again at a later date, you can also share it with your friend who might have more familiar with the birds in a certain area.
Share it with us.
You can share it with us. You can send it to us, no problem at all. We love that. Or you can actually get a computer-generated visual image of it. This is a spectrogram, which Kiirsti will get into in a minute. Now, if you don't carry your cell phone around with you all the time, bring a field notebook and just jot it down. Try and visualize the bird song and see the sound, and then you can jot that down. And that's actually how, way back when I first started, I identified a fox sparrow that was giving me trouble. I was hearing it, I couldn't get a visual. I was alone, it was my first birding job, so I was kind of nervous. So I drew it out in a booklet. I brought it home to my boss, or back to the truck, I should say, described where it was singing and what it was doing, and then showed her this very rough spectrogram that I just drew on my notebook, and she pretty well identified it right away. So these are different ways that you can learn how to listen for birds. You can learn all that, you can know all that, but you still have to be aware. There are tricky things out there, such as local dialects. A lot of you sound like you're experienced birders, so you're probably already aware the white-crowned sparrow can have a lot of different dialects. So you can be in the lower mainland or up in Kamloops.
Or the Rockies.
Or the Rockies. Sorry, I'm not familiar with Western geography. So, and they can be singing and you're like, okay, that's a white-crowned sparrow, you know it. And then you just go on the other side of the Rockies and then suddenly hearing something that, well, that sounds like a white-crowned sparrow, but it's not quite right. If you're aware of these different dialects, you might have more confidence, be like, okay, you know what, it's a little bit different, but that's to be expected because there are different dialects out there. And it just gives you a little more certainty when something sounds a little off. You can also have mimics out there. As we all know, I keep on wanting to say covids, not covids. Corvids are excellent mimics, and blue jays especially. They drive me a little nuts. You'll be out birding and you'll hear what you think is a red-tailed hawk, and you're out scanning the skies looking for a soaring buteo, and instead you look over your shoulder and there's a blue jay chattering away at you. So there are mimics out there that you have to be aware of, as well as birds with incredible variety. We all know European starlings can make a large variety of noise, but also birds such as the common chickadee. It has a chickadee and it has the cheeseburger that everyone's familiar with, but it also has a wide variety of calls that if you're fairly new might trick you up. And so it's important to learn kind of all the different noises that a bird can make and be aware that there are birds out there that can make a large variety of calls or songs. So I think I've chatted on long enough. I'll pass it back to Kiirsti.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just gonna really briefly touch on this idea of bioacoustics, because that's really what we're talking about right now is bird bioacoustics. So bioacoustics simply means the study of animal sounds. And spectrograms are essentially just a tool that we use to study animal sounds. So there are a few benefits of being able to read spectrograms. One of them is that it's just another tool in your bird ID toolbox. So you can ID birds by sight, you can ID birds by sound, and then if you can read spectrograms, you can also ID birds by the sight of their sound. So I find that really helpful. Also, it's more efficient. So as an example of what I mean by that, when I was doing those nightjar surveys, they actually sent me some recordings of them, and I went through hours of nocturnal recordings. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of empty sound. So I would scan through and not even listen, just scanning through the files, looking for the spectrogram of the night chart. And because I knew what it looked like, it was way more efficient to do it that way. So this is more for if you're doing it for research or volunteering, but I find it to be really efficient for those purposes. Also, tricky sound IDs. So there have been a few birds out there that I find difficult. Just when I listen to them, I can't quite hear the difference. But when I see the spectrograms, I can pick up on some of the fine structural features that are different between them. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, it clicks now. And then when I hear it again, it kind of makes more sense to me. Not sure if that would work for everyone, but if there are a couple species out there that you're struggling with, try looking at the spectrogram and see if that helps. I'm a visual learner, so maybe that's why it helps me. So let's look at a spectrogram. This is a song sparrow, so a very common bird that we're all familiar with, I'm sure. On the bottom here we have time in seconds, and then on the side we have frequency, so the pitch. And I'm gonna play the sound now. And what I'd like you to do is look at the screen, look at this spectrogram, and try to make a connection between what you're seeing on the screen and what you're hearing coming out of the speakers. So I'll play it now. Okay, so I'm just gonna show you, I've highlighted a few things here. The spectrogram actually can show us a lot of information. Because we have time, we know the song length. Because of frequency, we know not only the pitch overall, but the changes in pitch. And then we also can get at some of these qualities that, that Colin talked about earlier. So in this Song Sparrow song, we have some clear notes by these really bold-looking, clear-looking lines. And then these fuzzy-looking bars are, they're buzzy notes. So those buzzy notes are represented by this messy-looking line. And then we have these trills here. So anytime we have repeated quick notes, those are considered trill components of a song. So let me play it one more time and just look at this again and see if you can make that connection there. So hopefully that's making sense to you, especially because now we're gonna make you draw sounds. So we're gonna do a little quiz. What we're gonna do is we're gonna play 2 bird sounds, 2 different species. I'll play each one twice. And if you have a pen or pencil and a piece of paper, try to draw what you're hearing. Don't worry if you don't get this right away. This is how I learned to remember sounds. I just visualized them and drew them out. Colin just gave that example of what he did, but it's definitely not for everyone. I've had people tell me that they don't get this at all, so don't worry if you don't. But give it a shot. Here's the first one. I'll play it one more time. And the second one is a different species. And I'll play it one more time. Okay, so now we'll show you. So the first one was a common yellowthroat. So you can see that up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And then, actually, let me play that one again now that you can see it. So listen to this one again. This is the common yellowthroat. And then the other one was a golden-crowned sparrow. So very clear, pure notes here you can see. We have this, it starts at a high pitch, it has a downward slur, and then 2 separate notes, one at the same pitch as the end of this one, and then it drops to a new pitch. So let's listen to that one more time. It's a kind of an interesting song. So hopefully that kind of makes sense to you. Again, if it's not, don't worry about it, but I think it's really helpful for people who are visual learners. So, all right. We wanted to briefly touch on some of the resources for learning bird sounds that we've used. There's a lot of really great ones out there. If you are a smartphone user, there are a lot of great apps. I feel like there are more and more all the time. A lot of them are free. These first 4 here, these are all basically field guides on your phone. Like, you know, the field guide you might have as a book, but these have the added benefit of having sounds included. Usually they'll have the common song, but also some of the common call types too. So they're super helpful. We both use Sibley's and iBird Pro, and we really like them. But I've been using Merlin and Audubon recently too, and they're both free, and they're actually really good. I think they've gotten a lot better recently, so if you aren't using any of these, I recommend checking out the free ones first. Oops. Additionally, there are other apps out there too. This one, Spectrum View, is only for iOS right now, but it allows you to record bird sounds on your phone and actually see the spectrogram in real time, which is really cool. BirdNet, which is for Android only. This one, it gives you an automated ID of bird sounds. So if you want to be lazy and not learn the sounds on your own, you can use BirdNet. I've heard mixed reviews on it. I've heard that it works really well for some people and not so well for others. So give it a try. Let me know what you think if you want. I'm very curious. I haven't really tried it too much. Finally, online resources. There's lots of these. I think we've probably used these a lot because they've been around for a while. Dendroica is a website, and you can actually make quizzes of bird sounds, which is really handy. All About Birds, which is by Cornell, is great because it gives you a lot of, it gives you the sounds, but it also gives you the descriptors. And I find that helpful if you're trying to learn the words to describe bird sounds. Xenocanto, I have a screenshot on the next slide. I'm going to show you that just so you are familiar with it, because this is one of my favorite resources. And then Macaulay Library, that's what eBird uses, so there's a lot of great sounds on there. Larkwire is not free, it's about $25. Colin has used this one a lot. It's, yeah, 25 bucks. It's a really good resource if you really want to learn your bird sounds well. It puts them in these complexes. So this is that American robin complex, not very closely related birds, but they have very similar sounds. So it tests you again and again on similar sounding birds. So it's a good one for sure. Okay, so this is Xenocanto. I wanted to point this out because I use this a lot and I think it's really helpful if you're working with spectrograms or using recordings to figure out birds that you've recorded yourself. So if you go on Xenocanto, and this is the website here, and you type in a species, it'll come up with a list of recordings. And this is kind of hidden, but if you go to results format and click on sonograms, it'll allow you to see that list with all the spectrograms. And so I find this helpful because maybe I have my own recording of a bird and I open it up as a spectrogram, and you can do this in something like Raven Light or Audacity. There's lots of apps out there for looking at spectrograms. And so I'll have on the screen my recording, and then this allows me to visually compare and find call types or song types that match to see if I can figure it out. So I just wanted to point this out because I think it's a really great resource, all free. And then also on Xenocanto, you can upload your own sounds. And if you aren't sure what one is, people might actually ID it for you. So it's a really great resource. All right.
So now that Kiirsti's gone over in great detail, various tricks to help you learn and visualize sounds, we're going to try and put those into practice with common species that might be tricky in kind of your neck of the woods. So we recognize that you're birders already, most of you, and even those of you that aren't. We're not trying to teach you necessarily, okay, this is a hairy versus this is a downy. We're using these commonly mistaken species as ways,
examples,
as tools or examples of how you can use some of the lingo that we've taught you earlier and how you can visualize the sounds through spectrograms. So don't get overwhelmed by all the different comparisons we're giving you. Instead, focus on using some of the lingo and using these visualizations to help you identify the birds. So with that said, we're going to jump right into woodpeckers. So two of the more common woodpecker species we have are hairy and downy woodpecker. So they are visually quite similar birds, especially if you're new to birding and just see it from afar, but their songs are quite different. So starting with the hairy woodpecker, its primary call is a harsh rattle. So it's almost like a belted kingfisher. It's all on one pitch, and it is quite harsh.
Do you want to play it now?
Yeah. So
okay, so here's the sound.
It also kind of ends abruptly. There's no drop off. So that's their primary call note. It also has a secondary call note, which is much more sharp than the downy. It sounds more like there's more urgency behind it. And So the length of the call note is quite similar to the Downy. They are quite similar call notes. So you're looking for the quality. You're looking at the urgency behind the hairy woodpecker. And this can be a tricky one sometimes, but we'll play it now. So it sounds like they're almost panicked or something. There's definitely some urgency. So you can compare that to the Downy woodpecker. Its primary call is a descending, so it's still a trill, but it's a descending, it's higher pitch, and it's fairly easy to remember because Downy goes down. So their primary call, it descends at the end, like a Downy woodpecker goes down.
And you can actually see this in the spectrogram, which I think is really cool. You can see that it's going down as opposed to this very consistent pitched hairy woodpecker. So I'll play it now. Okay.
So here at the end there, it just drops right off. Its call note, so this is tricky because this recording is quite a bit louder than the other one, so it might sound a little bit urgent. But the pick call note is a little gentler and a little flatter. So you'd think soft like down. So it doesn't have quite the same sharp urgency to it if you want to play the hairy woodpecker call note again.
Sure.
So sharp, urgent. Okay, that's enough on those two. We'll move on to three larger woodpeckers. So we have the pileated northern flicker and red-breasted sapsucker. The pileated, it's a very large bird, as I'm sure you all know. And you can kind of get a sense of that even if you don't see it. So both its call and its drum it's powerful sounding. It's a very powerful sounding bird. So its call note is a series of slow, loud, and deep notes. It tends to increase a bit in pitch and then descends a bit at the end. So this is a little more subtle than like the Downy going down. So you have to listen for it, but it's definitely there. And again, it drops off in pitch, so it's not a sudden abrupt stop.
You can kind of see it here. You can see the increase. The decrease is a little bit more difficult to see. It looks like there's only maybe one note that's lower, but I'll play it now and you can see if you can hear it.
And it's just such a powerful sounding. It's one of my favorites.
Echoes.
So similar to its call, the drum is also very powerful. It says slow. You wouldn't describe it as slow unless you're comparing it to another drumming woodpecker. But it is slow and powerful and resonant. So just that, again, that's a word to describe the power behind it. And like the call note, it kind of drops off at the end. It doesn't stop abruptly. So these are all, I'm kind of setting up a comparison with the northern flicker because they are relatively similar. So the northern flicker, its primary call, it's a steady pitch. It doesn't have this increase and drop off in pitch. It's steady all the way through and it stops very abruptly. The quality is less clear. It's just generally less powerful sounding, and they tend to go on longer and faster. But the main thing for me is the sudden stop in the call.
Okay, I'll play that one now.
And then again, that sudden stop. And the drum is incredibly fast. It's almost like machine gun fast. Yeah. And the abrupt stop.
So
it's pretty incredible. So in addition to the primary call and the drum, northern flicker will give a really diagnostic call note. It's a very sharp, almost painful sounding Kiir. So we'll play that now.
it's like piercing almost.
Yeah, quite piercing. So the red-breasted sapsucker, I mentioned that we had a really good example of rhythm being diagnostic in a non-vocal sound produced by a bird. And it's definitely the red-breasted sapsucker, or any sapsucker for that matter, that we get North America, as far as I know. I'm not familiar with the Western species, but definitely out east. And the red-breasted sapsucker, they have this stutter start. So they start off really quickly, and it's like they're trying to find their rhythm, and eventually they do. But it's that quick start, quick series of drums, which she'll play for you now.
Which you can see in the spectrogram there too.
So it also has a call note that for beginners could be fairly similar to a northern flicker, but it's not nearly as piercing. It's like a wah, as opposed to like a kier. And so we'll play that. Wah. And again, we don't have access to the chat box or anything like that. So if people are finding that the sounds are very quiet, feel free to unmute us and give us a shout.
Yeah, we can turn it up a bit if it's needs to be.
But yeah, if it's fine, then we'll move on to, I think, our first quiz.
Ooh, yeah, quiz time. Okay, so jot down your answers. We have 3. I will play them each
Twice.
Twice? Okay. No,
Maybe 3 times if it's a quiet.
No, let's just do it twice.
Twice.
They're experts, I'm sure. All right, number 1. Okay, that was number 1. Number 2. I'll play it again. And number 3. Okay, I'm sure most of you got that. I feel like you're all bird experts, so here are the answers though. So number 1 was a downy woodpecker, the downy goes down. Number 2 was the red-breasted sapsucker, the
Stutter start.
stutter start. And number 3 was the kier of the northern flicker. So I'm going to take over now and do our next group. We're going to talk about thrushes, which are one of my favorite groups of singing birds because they have these amazing songs. Actually, I like to use the pointer. So I'll start with the hermit thrush. So now we're looking at some of these mnemonics here for some of the birds. Colin's better at doing the mnemonics than I am, so I'll get him to do most of them. So the hermit thrush. This bird's songs usually start with if you look at the spectrogram, a clear note, and then it's followed by this sort of echoey mix of notes. All of the thrushes have this sort of ethereal flute-like sound, but they're all a little different. I'll play the hermit thrush sound now.
So again, for emphasis, the variety of notes that they start on every time they sing a song, it's at a different pitch. So it almost sounds like they're different birds singing, but in actuality, it's the same hermit thrush that just alters the pitch that it's singing at, which makes for beautiful and easy to identify birds.
Mm-hmm. And you can see that on the spectrogram as well. You can see how it's higher here and lower there. That's not 2 different birds. That's one bird, as far as I know, singing lower on the next song. I'll do the call notes after, actually. Let's move on to Swainson's. So Swainson's is fun. It's also flute-like and ethereal sounding, but it just goes up, like it increases in pitch as it sings. And there's a great mnemonic for this, and I'm going to get Colin to do it.
I'm forever dreaming, dreaming.
Yeah, so increasing whistles. I'm going to play that now, and you can listen and see if you can pick up on that mnemonic. I think that one even says dreaming a few times.
Or I'm forever, forever dreaming, dreaming.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so really beautiful. but you can hear that it keeps going up, whereas the hermit doesn't. And then the varied thrush, on the other hand, again, ethereal, flute-like whistles, but always just a single note. And actually, sometimes it sounds a little buzzy and not as clear as the others, but very much a thrush-like sound. Each note is about 2 seconds, and like I said, single pitch, and then there's usually a long pause between songs. And like the hermit thrush, the next song will always be at a different pitch than the one before. So I'm gonna play it now. Listen for those long pauses. So really long pause. Okay, going back to the call notes for the hermit and the Swainsons. These are pretty diagnostic. They do have a few different call notes, but we just focused on a couple here. So for the hermit, there's a quick chup, but they also do the raspy, high-pitched, what is it? Is it like, I'm not gonna try to do it, I'll play it, and that's better than me trying to guess it, how it sounds and trying to reproduce it. So this is the call of the hermit thrush. There it is. So that's very diagnostic call of a hermit thrush. And then the Swainsons, and I've actually included the spectrogram of their call here. They have just a emphatic wit, but they also do the wit purr. So this is the wit and the purr. So I think we have both of those here. Let me play both of them. So there's the wit purr. There you go, lots of wit purrs there. And I think this one's just the wit. Yeah, so a wit note. So that's the Swainson's thrush. And fun fact, thrushes are pretty amazing. So they have a 2-part syrinx, which is like their voice box. And thrushes can actually control those 2 parts independently, which allows them to essentially harmonize with themselves. And that's how they can make these really amazing sounds. So pretty cool. Okay, the finches and warbling vireo, who someone was talking about warbling vireos earlier. So I put these 3 together because if you look at the spectrograms, they kind of look similar. I kind of struggle with these species because it's just like a mess of notes here, a mix of all different types of notes. So we'll try to work through these now. So the purple finch, they're warbled, but they have pure notes. It usually starts off with a couple of similar notes, but then it's followed by this jumble of warbled notes, often ending in a low note, but not always. This is one that you have to be aware of subspecies and local dialects for sure. And
that's especially true in your area. You're very close to a contact zone between Purpureus and Californicus, which are 2 subspecies. And they have noticeably different sounds. So just to be aware of in your area.
I'll play the purple finch now. And okay, the house finch. So also warbled. I think it sounds tweedier. Colin said rougher. I'll play it and you can see what you think. So it's the house finch. I think it sounds tweedier, but it has a similar pattern to the purple finch, but it has this raspy G upward slurred note. So let me play it again and listen for that particular note, because this is diagnostic and will really give it away as being a house finch. There it is, that G.
Recognize it? That's the guy.
Is it?
And the males will sing year round. I guess that's just kind of a fun fact. For the warbling vireo, also a warbled sound, obviously, but lots of pure notes with some emphatic notes interspersed, and that's really what gives it away. And so Colin's put this mnemonic here that I'm going to get him to do in a sec because he does it very well. It's one of my favorite ones. And these exclamation points represent these emphatic notes. So
I will find you. When I find you, I will squeeze you till you squeak. And this is another one where there's local dialects. So out east, we get that mnemonic works perfectly. It's unbelievable. Out west, you can still hear it, but it's not quite as clear. But when she plays it, listen for it. And again, as she mentioned, the emphatic notes are really what the dead giveaway is.
okay, here it is. So hopefully you can hear those emphatic notes because that really helps. And then we also included the call note. So if you're hearing something like that and you're not sure if it's a vireo or a finch, warbling vireos make that sort of classic vireo call, which sounds like, it's a great sound. Most vireos have a call that's similar to that, kind of a, I don't know, that's not very good example, but you know what I mean.
So if you're hearing these warbled sounds and you're listening for a long time and you don't hear this G or a call note like, then maybe you start looking at purple finch. So this is where it really helps to not just go listen to a bird for a bit and assume you know it. Really spend some time with the bird. Listen for its other vocalizations, so not just the song, but also the call note, or the occasional dead giveaway, like the house finch giving that G, which is actually quite similar to pine siskins will also do it.
Sure.
So something to keep in mind.
And fun fact, the females in both of these species sing. And that's something I'm actually super interested in. We're finding out more and more that so many females in bird species can sing. So something to be aware of as well. All right, the chickadees. This is a fun group. Let me just get the sounds ready. So let's start with the black-capped chickadee. This bird has the classic, what I call the cheeseburger song. Some people call it the Phoebe song. This is their breeding song. The mountain chickadee also has a cheeseburger song, and then the chestnut-backed chickadee does not. So if you're hearing that classic cheeseburger, then you're narrowing it down to these two. So the black-capped chickadee's cheeseburger sound is represented here in the spectrogram. So it's usually just two notes and they drop in pitch and they're very pure, very clear. So you can see the notes there are represented by these really clear lines. And I'll play it now. So there's that cheeseburger. I'll play it one more time. So to compare that to the mountain chickadee, it's very similar, but it's usually 3 to 6 syllables, so more syllables. Also drops in pitch, and it's sometimes just a little bit slower. So let's play that one now. So there's that cheeseburger. So just kind of slower than the black-capped. Again, chestnut-back does not have a cheeseburger song. Its main call is a mix of sort of high, thin, scratchy notes. I didn't include those here, but I did include the chickadee song. So let's talk about those now. For the black-capped chickadee, the chickadee is represented by these spectrograms. So it's got the chickadees, or sometimes D. So I'll play that one now. So this is, of course, how these birds get their names, is by this chickadee call. The mountain chickadee also has a chickadee call, but it's kind of more of a chickadees. It's harsher, it's slower, and I'll play it now. I think of it as like a chickadee that's a little bit stuffed up. It's just kind of like nasally sounding, I guess. And then the chestnut-backed, its song is very short and kind of sneezy, I guess. Here, I'll let you have a listen. Yeah, so one way you can remember it, this is how I remember, is that a chestnut-backed chickadee is like just getting a cold. And then the mountain chickadee is like well into its cold. It's like heavily congested. That's how I remember it. And then the black-cap's a good healthy chickadee.
I think it's quiz time.
Yeah, quiz time. Okay, so 3 more bird species. See if you can guess them all. So the first one, here we go. And I'll play it again. And number 2. It's not the bird in the background. It's not a purple finch. It's the other one. Is that a purple finch? I wasn't listening that closely. Okay, and finally, number 3. This one's a hard one. Play it again. Okay, so let's see if you got those. Here are the answers. So number 1 was a Swainson's thrush.
I'm forever dreaming, dreaming.
Yep. The number 2 was the mountain chickadee, so the chickadee that's congested. And number 3 was the warbling vireo, so it had those emphatic notes. Do you want to do it?
I will find you. When I find you, I will squeeze you till you squeak.
There you go. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Colin for our next group.
All right. So earlier I mentioned American robins were one of my favorite complexes, and a really good example of when you can learn one really common bird species, and it'll help you learn other species that sing quite similarly, but just a little different. So the American robin, we'll start with the common one. Its song is a fairly pleasant cheerly, cheerly, cheer up, cheer up, cheer up. So it rises and falls. There are short pauses. And typically it'll sing about 10 phrases per singing bout. I mean, that's not set in stone, certainly, but it sings quite a few phrases in a row, and then there'll be a pause, and then it'll sing again. And as you can see in the spectrogram, it is quite clear. Like, there's not a lot of buzziness or fuzziness about these notes. They're quite clear and concise. I don't know if that word doesn't quite work, but they're clear, bold notes. So we'll give you an example of that. Oh, that's fine. Okay.
Classic sound of summer.
And again, you guys are experienced birders, so we're not playing the American robin because we think you don't know it, but we're just playing it again for you so you can use some of these new terminology that we might have given to you, or listen to it with kind of new ears, hopefully having learned what we just discussed. So that's the American robin. Something that has similar song is the Western tanager. And this is, as I mentioned before, it's just a little burrier, a little raspier, hoarser, and it sings fewer phrases, typically only 3 to 5, with short pauses in between. We'll give an example of that. It also sounds quite fast.
It does sing again eventually.
That's quite a long. Oh. So there you go. You can hear it's certainly a bit burrier. The hoarsiness or raspiness rather, I didn't hear in that recording, but you will often hear it. Now, the favorite thing about the Western Tanager for me is what I call the Buddha beeps. In the books, you'll hear it written pittericks. I still hear it as a Buddha beep. And these will be thrown kind of at the end of a song occasionally, or it'll be their call note. And so again, if you spend enough time with these birds, instead of just hearing something, assuming you know it, spend some time with it, like 30 seconds will probably do it, and they'll give away a diagnostic key, such as this Buddha beep. So we'll play it now. Buddha beep.
I hear the pitterick.
Yeah. I'm starting to hear it more, but I love my Buddha beep. And people have described this as a bird asking questions and answering a series of like rapid fire, boom, boom, boom. So it's quite quick. The black-headed grosbeak, it again has quite clear whistles. You see there's not a ton of fuzziness around the notes, but it's longer, it's sweeter sounding, which is one we haven't described in the past. And I struggle to describe what is meant by sweeter. It's something you just kind of have to listen to.
You just know it.
And if you're familiar with your bird books, you'll notice what birds they describe as being sweet sounding, and then maybe you can get a better sense of what they mean. And they are much more varied than a robin. They're also faster and a little less choppy. You can see they kind of go on a bit longer. It's like a very chatty robin. It just won't take a pause. It just keeps going.
Sweeter maybe is like easier on the ears. I don't know.
Yeah,
anyways.
That works. So next up we have the epidinax. So these are great examples, as Kiirsti mentioned. Looking at photos of them, or even for birders having them in the hand, sometimes they can be a nightmare to identify. However, as she mentioned, if you hear them sing or call, it's typically a dead giveaway, and this is especially true out west. Most of your epidinaxes are pretty distinct sounding. So to start, we have the willow flycatcher, and this has a very fun mnemonic, just like a very Fitzboo. So it's quick up and down, and that's compared with the alder flycatcher, which is, for a while, they were considered the same species, so very similar.
They look almost identical, really difficult to tell apart.
And yet, if you listen to them, the alder flycatcher is a free beer. So none of this like quick notes. It's like a very slurred, almost drunk sounding free beer. So that's a good example of a species that looks very similar, but is super easy if you learn to bird by ear. Very easy to tell apart. So as I mentioned, it's fairly buzzy sounding. It's a very quick up-down. And it tends to be repeated quite frequently. And some people say it's reminiscent of a bury zipper, just like up, down. Everyone hears things a little bit differently, but it's something to listen to for sure.
Play it now. There you go.
It's boo. So I find it's quite cute. The Pacific Slope flycatcher, I'm less familiar with. We don't get them out here, as the name implies. But this is the mnemonic that's quite commonly used. And you can hear it. It's very thin, tinkly, which is a fun way to describe a bird sound, and very high-pitched. It is fairly steady with very slight pauses between the songs. And it also has a call note, a peeweet, that has an emphatic ending. So this is its song as well is quite emphatic. So we'll play that now.
Yeah, and it kind of, sometimes you'll only hear a few, but once it gets going, it kind of gets into that pattern that you see in that mnemonic there, and then you know it's the Pacific Slope.
So finally, we're going on to, fun facts.
Fun fact.
Right. So in addition to learning bird songs and bird call notes and how to listen for their vocalizations, non-vocal bird sounds are also super important when identifying birds. So flycatchers, they'll snap their bills. So they do this while they're foraging for insects. They'll flitter from a branch, and you can hear the snap of the beak.
It's usually like a snap, snap, right?
Yeah, it can be as they grab insects, but they'll also do it while they're defending territory. So something else to listen for when you're out there birding. Finally, for me, we have the high tinkly birds. I mentioned the golden-crowned kinglet before as an example of a bird that changes pace. So this bird, you can see it starts quite slow. These notes are fairly long compared to the ending where they're a little faster. So it starts slow, gets fast, and drops down. It also rises in pitch and drops in pitch. And it is very high, sweet musical notes and a bit warbly at the end. So pretty easy one to learn.
I think of it as like cascading at the end.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it goes up, 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 down.
And next we have the Ruby-crowned Kinglet. And the nice thing about these birds is often they'll be found foraging together. So if you learn to ID them by ear, it'll be that much easier to separate them because they're very flitty birds. So you won't often get a crisp, clean look like this. But if you can learn to identify their songs and their calls, then that'll be much easier to distinguish them. The Ruby-crowned Kinglet, it has a really fun mnemonic, and again, out east, this works very well, and a little less so out west, but it's a chubby cheeks, chubby cheeks, chubby cheeks, chubby cheeks. And there are distinct parts to this song. So it does have a rising, falling beginning that's very high, almost similar to golden-crowned kinglet. To me, sounds like a car trying to start. We'll listen to it in a sec. That you won't hear unless you're fairly close. If you're out in the boreal and there's a bog, this will carry incredibly far. So you'll very often hear the end, which is kind of the chubby cheeks, or at west, the chubby, 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 chubby cheeks. And yeah, we'll play that now. So listen for the beginning, high-pitched beginning, and then finish with the chubby, chubby, chubby cheeks.
What is that? Chubby, chubby, chubby,
Chubby, chubby, chubby, chubby cheeks. So we were talking about changing pitches earlier, and if you just heard the beginning, you would almost mistake it for a golden-crowned kinglet. So that's why it's important to listen to the entire song, because clearly this part, the pitch is much lower, the quality is incredibly different than a golden-crowned kinglet.
We don't have an example of the call, but maybe you want to talk about that really briefly.
Yeah, call notes are quite different between golden-crowned and ruby-crowned kinglets. The golden crown has a lot of high-pitched notes, tinkly call notes, but the ruby-crowned, it's more similar to the quality of the chubby cheeks. Its calls a distinctive, emphatic, jdeep, kind of scolding note. We don't
have an example, but I encourage you to look it up yourself, because once you learn that, it makes it really easy to ID those two.
And the final high tinkly bird is the brown creeper. And this has a really fun mnemonic of trees, trees, pretty little trees. And out west, this is one example where your West Coast birds actually fits the mnemonic better than out east. It rises in pitch. So trees, trees, pretty little trees works quite well. So we'll play that now.
I also find if you're hearing a mix of, or you're not sure if it's a creeper or a kinglet or something, the brown creeper tends to sing a bit louder. Its sound seems to carry a little bit more. So if you hear like a call note that's a little bit more piercing, it could be a creeper as opposed to a kinglet. Kinglets are a little bit softer, I find.
And now I think we're back to...
No, we have a not so fun fact.
Oh, right. Not so fun fact. Because these are high tinkly birds, kinglets are often the first bird songs that people can no longer hear. as they get older. That's certainly true with my father. Yeah, he's high pitched. Unfortunately, he can't hear them anymore, which is a shame because they're beautiful sounding birds. But
so if you can still hear them, then enjoy them now while you can.
now it's quiz time.
All right.
So the first bird up, we'll play it a couple times for you.
So that's number 1. Number 2. Not the robin in the background. That one.
And the final one for this quiz.
All right, let's see how you did.
So the first one was the brown creeper, the trees, pretty little trees. We then had the fitzboo of the willow flycatcher, the buzzy up down. And then finally we had the western tanager, which was almost like a burry, shorter, faster robin. All right.
All right, I'm gonna take over now for our very last group.
And I think she's stepping it up a notch.
Yeah, now it gets a little intense. So definitely we have a recording of this we can send out so that you can review this if you want, because it gets a little heavy here. We tried to fit a lot in. So we're gonna look at some sparrows. The song sparrow, we already looked at this very same spectrogram earlier. So it starts usually slow with a couple of high intro notes or clear intro notes, and then it's followed by a jumble of trills and buzzes and clear notes. There's usually variation between individuals, but usually following the same pattern. So let's listen to this one again. It's the same one from earlier. So you can see mixes of trills and buzzes and clear notes. I'm going to jump down to the Lincoln sparrow because I think that one is kind of similar to the song sparrow, except as you can see, it's a lot more of the trill pieces as opposed to the buzzes and the clear notes. Usually it's a bit huskier sounding, and I'll play it so you can hear what I mean by that. And it always kind of follows this pattern where it starts low, goes high, and then starts low again, and it forms these kind of boxy looking spectrograms. And this is maybe is kind of a weird way to think of it, but I always thought of it as like the podium at the Olympics is like, it's, you know, second place, first place, and then third place is low. That's kind of weird, but when I see it, I always know that's a Lincoln sparrow. So let's listen to it now, and you can see if you can hear the husky trills. So there's our Lincoln sparrow. I'll play one more time. So there will be some variation, but always follows that pattern more or less. Something happened to this spectrogram. Whoops. Okay, well that's unfortunate, but we already saw that one anyway. So I'm gonna go over here to the fox sparrow now. So another mix of different buzzes and maybe even trills and slurs. And so the slurs is kind of what makes it different from the song and the Lincoln sparrow. And you can see it starts with these slurry notes and then has a bit of a mix. So let me play it now and see if you can hear that. There it is. So you can hear it starts with these clear but slurry notes and then goes into some buzzes and maybe even some trills. Usually follows a similar pattern. And then the white-crowned sparrow also has these clear notes at the start and then goes into buzzes. But it follows usually a pretty common pattern that has its own mnemonic, which is, do you want to do it?
I want more cheesies, please.
So it's clear.
Which I also follow that mnemonic sometimes when we're on road trips.
Yeah, you live by that as well. So it starts with clear whistled intro notes, and then it's followed by usually like buzzy trills. And both of these, the pace increases. So let's hear the white-crowned sparrow. There it is. I want more cheesies, please. Let me play the fox sparrow again so you can hear the difference. This is the fox, and this is the white-crowned. So quite different, but kind of similar patterns when you're looking at the spectrograms. The golden-crowned sparrow, this is the one we did it when we did the drawing. So even though it's not showing here, we've seen this one already. So this is that all clear, pure notes, but it has the downward slur, and then it goes into those two notes. And so it follows this pattern of, well, let me play it, and then it'll, where is it there? Golden-crowned sparrow, here we go. So there's that, oh dear me, or I'm so tired. So clear, it kind of sounds sad, kind of melancholy. Sometimes there's a trill at the end as well, but this one didn't have that. So those are some of our sparrows. I know that's a lot, but we're just trying to get you familiar with how to describe them. Next up are the trillers. This is a tricky group of birds. Trillers are tough. Definitely don't worry if you don't get this. It takes a lot of practice. And there's tons of overlap, especially I find between juncos and chipping sparrows, for example. You can get juncos that sound like chipping sparrows and chipping sparrows that sound like juncos. But we'll go through them and give you some tips. So let's start with the orange crown warbler. So it's a very rapid descending trill and kind of flat sounding notes. And you can actually see in this spectrogram that it's kind of going down. It has this little weird uptick, which is just the particular recording that we chose, but overall downward trill. And so we'll listen to it now. So it kind of goes down and it's got a flat sound to it. I'll play it one more time.
So this is where, if you really understand the quality of a sound, quality of a song, what you'd be expecting, little individual variations like that slight uptick, it won't necessarily throw you off, because you'll know for other things to look at. You'll know that generally an orange crown descends like that, and it has that kind of flat quality to it. It's a very rapid descending trill. So another reason to take the holistic approach to learning your bird songs.
The chipping sparrow, talking about rapid, this is super rapid trill. It's also quite a bit longer than most of the other trillers. You can tell by looking at these other ones, it's a longer song. And actually they can, I learned this recently, they can sing an average of 55 notes in, I think, 3.5 seconds is what it is. So pretty amazing. It's described as being kind of dry, mechanical, definitely not musical or ringy or any of those things that some of the other ones are. So very dry. So we'll play that one now. Super fast. Yeah, so just very dry sounding song. The junco, on the other hand, it's usually shorter. It often will repeat its songs quite quickly, and it's usually more ringy, more musical sounding than the chipping sparrow. So let's hear that one now. So there's the ringiness.
And for me, the length of the song, the quality of the song, and how they're repeated often reminds me of an old school telephone. And is another example of, if you get familiar enough with a bird, you're almost expecting it to come. If you hear one of those trills and you find yourself expecting something 3 or 5 seconds later, then you're already leaning towards an identification of a dark-eyed junco. And then if it does sing, it's the most satisfying kind of confirmation that it's providing.
Yeah.
But, sorry, I'm jumping in the line.
It's okay, I don't mind. Okay, let's go down to the bottom. So these are all warblers. They all sing slightly shorter trills. We'll start with the Wilsons. It's usually about 10 to 15 notes. It has a chattery quality to it, And as you can see, it kind of descends a bit with the last few notes being lower and sometimes even faster than the other ones. So let's hear the Wilsons. So there's that chattery. I'll play it again. And then we've got the palm warbler. I know you don't really get a lot of palms out there, but I think this is just a really good example of a buzzy trill. So I threw it in here just to show you. So it's very distinct, buzzy trill, slow and short as well. And then finally the yellow-rumped warbler. So this is actually a myrtle warbler that we've got. It's a rapid descending trill. Sometimes it slows a bit at the end. Often it has two parts, like this one, it kind of has one part and then a second part. Very variable, but just have a listen. The quality is usually the same. So there's that two-part.
And as Kiirsti mentioned, they are super variable. And so this one happened to descend. But I feel like I've been hearing more that will actually go up at the end. But again, the quality of those first few notes is the exact same.
Key, yeah. All right, and this is our very last group of birds. So a few more warblers, West Coast warblers that we wanted to focus on. The top two are our buzzy warblers. So we have the black-throated gray and the Townsends. Black-throated gray has this great zeedle zeedle zeet zeet cha. They're dense, fast, buzzy slurs. Again, lots of variation, but overall quality remains the same. So the warblers, learning the quality of the songs is key because a lot of them have variation. So here's the black-throated gray. I'll play it one more time. So zeedle zeedle zee zee cha. I don't know, I can't really do that as well as Colin can. The Townsends is also buzzy. I think it's maybe less buzzy than the black-throated gray, but it has some pure notes mixed in. It's fast, it usually rises in pitch, and also often increases in volume. So here's the Townsends. And then on the bottom, we have our yellow warbler. So when I think of a sweet sounding bird, I always think of the yellow warbler. It even has sweet in the mnemonic, the sweet, sweet shredded wheat. So these are clear, sweet notes, slightly slurred, often dropping, increasing in volume, but dropping in pitch, and emphatic as well. So here is our yellow warbler. So it's quite fast. Maybe the one you would get this confused with would be an American redstart, which I don't have an example of, but usually it's this exact pattern here. The McGilvery's is a fun one. It's that cheetle, cheetle, cheetle turtle. I really like this one. It's burry, changing in pitch. It's also lower pitch than most of the warblers. I'll play that one for you now. It just has kind of a fun sound to it, that cheetle, 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 turtle. And
for me, this is a funny example where you can have it's fairly low pitch, but it also has almost like a tinkly quality. Like you can almost, I don't know if ringing is the right word, but if you listen to it closely, it's low pitch, but you also have these really funny, tinkly qualities to it.
I'll play it one more time. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's still a warbler, so it's still high pitched, but yeah. So that's it. That's it for birds. We got one more quiz based on those. So give it a shot. Here's number 1. I'll play it one more time. And number 2. I'll play it one more time. And finally, number 3. All right, so that was a tricky one, but hopefully some of you got it, or most of you got them. So number 1 was our long triller, the mechanical dry trill, the chipping sparrow. Number 2 was the I want more cheesies, please, the white-crowned sparrow. And number 3 was our very sweet sounding yellow warbler. And so just before we say goodbye, I just wanted to mention why listening is important from a conservation side of things, because both Colin and I are conservation biologists, and obviously that is important to us. I imagine that most of you are familiar with the book Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, but if you're not, the author was finding that she was hearing fewer and fewer birds singing, and was able to link this to pollution from DDT. So by listening to birds, we can better understand conservation issues that are affecting them. And if we want to help, we can all get involved in citizen science and community science initiatives if we want to be directly involved in bird sound research through things like eBird or the Christmas bird count or the nightjar survey. There's lots of opportunities out there that you can put your birding by ear skills to use. And with that, we'd like to, oh, my contact information didn't show up there. Just
Apparently
a little.
she doesn't want you to contact her with questions.
You can contact Colin, apparently. Yes, thank you everyone for sticking with us through this. Thank you, Nature Vancouver, for hosting us. I want to give a big thank you to James McKenzie, who supplied most of the awesome photos that we used in this. All of the good photos are his. All of the less good ones are mine. You can follow him on Instagram if you're on Instagram, or just look at his photos on there at Biodiversity Vancouver. He's a really great photographer, as you can see. We'll be happy to take questions now. We can't stick around too late because it's 11:30 for us, but we'll definitely answer a few. Otherwise, you can reach out to Colin by email or send recordings. You can also reach out to me. Maybe Nature Vancouver can send out my email too, but my email was supposed to be there as well. I'm Kowen at WildResearch.ca. That's pretty easy. Kowen at WildResearch.ca.